morning, everyone, and welcome to the NYSEC webinar on effective county administration, governance, roles, and best practices. My name is Jeanette Stanziano, and I am the Director of Education and Training for the New York State Association of Counties. Effective administration is the foundation of a well-functioning, responsive, and resilient county government. This session delves into the key principles and practices that drive excellence in county management. You'll gain actionable insights on fostering proper governance, building strong board staff relations, and identifying roles and responsibilities within the organization more clearly. Whether you're an elected official, a county administrator, a manager, or a government professional, today's session will equip you with the tools and strategies to navigate complex challenges, align organizational goals, and lead with integrity and purpose. I want to thank Ian Coyle from Pracademics and Ryan Pesci from Jefferson County, who have agreed to join this webinar today. This session was offered at the recent NYSEC Fall Seminar in Niagara Falls. It was standing room only, and there were so many people who gave us great feedback about this session that we decided to run it as a webinar to reach people that otherwise were not able to attend the session out in Niagara Falls in the western part of the state. I'd like to give you a couple of housekeeping measures this morning. We are recording this session as NYSEC customarily does, and we will be posting it on the NYSEC website just about an hour after the event, after it converts into the format for the website. We will also be posting a PDF of the slide deck. So just go to nysec.org/webinars and look for today's date. We also want to encourage you throughout the program to submit any questions you might have for Ian or Ryan. To do so, just refer to your dashboard and click on the questions tab. There you'll find the ability to type in your questions, and we will get to them at the end of the program during Q&A. So it's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers. Dr. Ian Coyle is the founder of Pracademic Partners. Pracademic Partners are also a very strong supporter of NYSEC, and Ian has been an integral part of many trainings when he served in county government. Ian is a very good friend of NYSEC. We're very happy to have him. Ian's a proud product of South Buffalo, where his family roots go back as far as the 1800s. Dr. Ian Coyle is a graduate of Bishop Timmons St. Jude High School, St. Bonaventure University, where he earned his BA in political science, and the University of Albany, where he earned his MPA in public management. He received his doctorate in public administration with a specialization in public sector management from Valdosta State University. He is also an ICMA credentialed manager and an executive coach and mentor, and a certified e-learning instructor. Ian is an accomplished Pracademic, having a 20+ year career in local government management, coupled with 17+ years of service in part-time teaching, coaching, and course development assignments for various leading MPA programs all over the country. Ryan Pesci is a county administrator from Jefferson County. Ryan has been the administrator since 2024 and also serves as the clerk of the board, budget officer, and records access officer. He brings to Jefferson County more than a decade of experience in public administration. Before his current role, he served as the county manager of Lewis County, New York, where he oversaw major projects, including infrastructure improvements and committee restructuring. He also has deep personal ties to the region, having grown up in Adams Center. His grandparents also lived in Cape Vincent and 3 Mile Bay. And his early community involvement includes working as a lifeguard at Thompson Park in Watertown. He holds a Master of Public Administration from the University at Albany and a Bachelor's of Arts from Lemoyne College. As administrator, he focuses on issues like affordable housing, homelessness, and broadband expansion, emphasizing fiscal responsibility and partnership with the County Board of Legislators. Ryan is a dedicated public servant, and we are very happy to have him today for his perspective on this important topic. I am now going to turn over control of the program to Ian Coyle, who will begin his presentation. Ian, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Jeanette. And thanks for the introductions and the bios. And thanks for NYSAC for coordinating this event. We really appreciate it. I am going to test my skills here. Okay, so you heard this is, we're not on webcam, but this is me. I'm the one with less hair, shall we say, and that's Ryan. And we've been connected for some time. As you heard in the bios, we both attended a master's program at Rockefeller College at the University of Albany. We also have worked at the municipal level in the past. We then kind of worked real closely together through NYSAC and through the county administrators group when Ryan was at Lewis County and I was at Livingston County. So we also share a mentor in the fact that Bob McAvoy, who was the former Schenectady County manager, was a professor and an adjunct faculty member at Rockefeller College, and sort of mentored us both and sort of got us both into the profession of county administration. So we have that as a connection as well. Ryan has worked in various states. I've stayed in New York, but as we know here, it was mentioned that I'm a leadership coach, which I do and I really like. I'm also a basketball coach, and Ryan's on the other side. So he's a basketball referee. So if I'm the one getting the technical fouls, Ryan is the one giving the technical fouls, as I like to say. So we want to just sort of share a little bit about our history, sort of our connections, sort of that go beyond the bio, and sort of who you're hearing from as we talk about governance administration. Ryan, before we kick things off in earnest, did I miss anything there?
No, but I like that my time as a lifeguard was highlighted. That's wonderful.
Yes, yeah. So, and that probably has served you well in your career in public administration. So, and probably the referee and trying to, assuage concerns and, deal with difficult circumstances and maybe work in some environments that are challenging at times over the years. So, so here's a little bit of something we're going to talk about. So before we begin, you may know some of these faces. These are some, stalwarts of NYSAC, right? In addition to the chairman of the board, but these are some stalwarts of NYSAC, and they're placed on here because there are a lot of differences amongst our counties. We have, including the boroughs, we have 62 counties, so 57 counties besides those in New York City. We have county legislatures with county managers. We have board of supervisors with county administrators. We have a board of representatives with a county administrator. We have a county legislature with a chief administrative officer. We have, as I say, we have people from the North Country on here, and we have people from God's country on here. We have NYSAC presidents, we have NYSAC board members, we have, and really the point of this slide is to say that there's a lot of differences across the county government structures. There are a lot of personnel particulars, like how it's titled here, how it's titled there. We of course have a dozen plus counties, probably more, that have operate under a county executive form of government. We have many that operate under a county manager, many that operate under a county administrator, and we have a handful that employ or do not employ or lack the position of either county executive or county administrator. So there's a handful of counties that don't have that chief administrative or chief executive officer type position. So we hope to relay to you some best practices that translate and transfer and go beyond the type of real government. The perspectives that Ryan and I are going to be talking about today are built foundationally on the fact that we've been county administrators and county managers. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But really, I think the governance best practices and effective county administration type tactics and strategies that we'll relay here to you today, hopefully will transfer and translate to wherever you happen to be operating in a county government in New York. And I'm gonna transition here to the next one. So here's what we're gonna cover today. as a run of show, these are the 7 kind of segments we're going to cover. And in particular, I want to highlight segment 6. As Jeanette said, we are going to allow for some time to have some Q&A, you know, vis-a-vis the chat here, and do anticipate questions. We had a lot of really good questions when we did this in person. Ryan and I have done this presentation together twice for the New York State City County Management Association, and also for the New York State Association of Counties, as was mentioned at the fall conference. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan, and he's going to handle this one, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Ian. Charles Dickens to kick us off here. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I think what in this profession, we're all here. I've never met an elected official that's, you know, in the room for the wrong reasons. When things are working well, when the staff and the board, your elected officials and your appointed officials are working together, serving the community, this can be the most unbelievably rewarding career and an incredible public service. However, when those relationships are fraught, when people's lanes are not clear, when the politics aren't good, this is a really, really tough job, and a really tough assignment for elected officials too. So if it's, you know, so much of what we get out of public service depends on this relationship between elected officials and staff, why don't we talk about it more often? And that's kind of the point of this presentation is, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what works, and let's talk about how we can make sure everyone's having an effective term in public service.
And something else to note here that we should have mentioned up front about the complexities and the challenges and the amazing work that is also done at the county level in New York State. As was mentioned, I have some connections across the country. I speak and teach and present and work with counties across the country. Nowhere except New York, in a county government level, do you find what New York County government does in terms of the breadth, service, scope, and diversity of services within the county government structure in New York. All of the things that a traditional local government has, county governments usually have. And then we have everything on top of that at the county government level. And then in New York, because of either we choose to do it from a non-mandated service that we choose to provide, or a mandated service that we have to provide, we find ourselves in a whole host of different areas of service that most traditional county governments do not. So everybody's got their challenges. We have a very unique set of circumstances in New York because of what services we deliver, how we deliver them, and what's funneled and flows through county government proper. So, okay, we got a Ghostbusters reference after Charles Dickens.
Well, you know, in this, we're talking about mutual respect. The door swings both ways. Staff has to have a foundation of respect for elected officials. Respect the fact that they stepped up, put their name on the ballot, and asked their peers and neighbors in the community to, you know, to weigh in on them and give them, you know, a position to lead in the community. It takes a lot of guts to do that. Respect that elected officials want to do a good job. They really want to do a good job. But elected officials have to respect the expertise of staff. They have to respect the complexity of county government. As Ian was just saying, you know, this is complex stuff. And in order for this relationship between staff and elected officials to work, there has to be mutual relationship, mutual respect. The door has to swing both ways.
Thank you, Ryan. And also, there has to be a philosophy of transparency. There has to be a philosophy and a kind of a culture of what we refer to as no surprises. And we're not naive to suggest that surprises don't pop up. Of course they do. But certainly instilling a culture throughout in these board manager, board staff, manager staff relations that we're going to aim to not be surprised. So what does that mean? Personnel coming or going, you want your board to be updated on that. A company closure or some announcement of a political nature in the community, you want to be first out there with the news to either staff or your board. You want the board to also be, and the legislature also to have a no surprises philosophy and culture and mindset with the staff as well. So we don't want, underhandedness on either end. We don't want people trying to do workarounds on either end. We want the news up front. We want the bad news up front. We want the good news up front. So kind of a culture organizationally of no surprises rarely leads people the wrong way. And when you try to hide and when you try to placate, try to fabricate, or you try to, refrain from relaying stuff that's not so hot, usually that's when you run aground. So it also should be throughout this, we'll hear a little bit about this, no surprises. You want full transparency in your actions, and that will usually lead you to better outcomes. So we're going to segue into what we term governance versus management. If I can, oh, here we go. So what you have is the common sort of dichotomy or the common differentiation that you sometimes see out there in the world of local government management, whether it's a city manager, a county manager, town manager, village administrator, is this concept of the composers and the conductors. And the top level thing to say is that's all interconnected. That's all interwoven. It's not an either or type of a scenario. It's all interwoven. It's all connected. It's all interconnected. It all has to sort of hum and flow and work together to work well. But conceptually, what we like to relay with this slide is that the composers are, in the case of a board or a legislature, that's the elected officials. They're the ones sort of composing the policy, composing the vision, exercising that will of the people to say, we would like to do this. We endeavor to do this. I was elected to carry forward this. We as a county wish to do the following. And so the other side of that, but again, that interconnectedness is that other part, that key player is that conductor. In the case of an administrator manager, that person is the conductor. Where else are we talking about with a music analogy here to keep this going? Well, ideally, you're singing off the same sheet of music, right? Ideally, you have within the orchestra the right people and players, and good players in those orchestra seats, i.e. department heads, i.e. staff, i.e. stakeholders. You have an audience, your stakeholders, your taxpayers. And this conductor is charged with carrying out the vision and putting into effect the policy of those that compose the policy. So the most symbolic description we can think of for the governance versus management is the composer versus the conductor. And what's not on this is everybody else that's involved who represent really as much as an integral player in what the music score ends up looking like as the conductor. Ryan, anything to add on this one?
No, I think you nailed it. I agree.
And the other analogy, and we've used a couple so far, but I think it's helpful to use these sort of snapshots and these things that hopefully resonate a little bit as far as examples and how this really works in real life, is the bus analogy. So first of all, there's really kind of a twofold example. We're only using one, which is sort of the cord to stop the bus. But it's also what's not on this visual, which is who's on the bus. So when you're progressing on issues and you're trying to advance things at the county level and you're trying to do the good, really great work of public service at the county level, first of all, you want the right people on the bus in the right seats with you along the way. That's not just county government staff. And sometimes that's additional stakeholders, intergovernmental partners, business owners, chamber people, depending on the issue. You want the right people on the bus. But from the governance administration side of like just the board and just the organization, you have to realize too that as board members and potentially as staff, but as board members, there's an opportunity to sort of hold on a second. I'm 1/5 of this board. I'm 1/17 of this board. I want my voice heard. I don't like this issue. I don't like this advancement. And people, who are board members, they're people. They have views. They have, subjective assessments on whatever issues being talked about. they have the ability really to, stop progress, or I guess you could say get off the bus. So this is another analogy and we're going to talk about a lot of different things here when we springboard off here in just a minute, but just some analogies to think about, right? That the door swinging both ways, the composer conductor, no surprises, having the right people on the bus, knowing that the bus or the pathway forward could potentially get stifled, could potentially get stopped, could potentially get started and restarted. Think about all those things as we progress forward in the rest of this presentation.
So one more
go
analogy.
ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Ian. One more analogy. This is something that we hand out in Jefferson County at new legislator orientation. I've had this with me throughout my career with elected officials and staff. So it's the legislator and staff work flight analogy. So think about an airport and think about all it takes to fly a plane, land a plane, just kind of use that analogy. Think about purpose and vision, 50,000 foot view. That is mostly the responsibility of elected officials. So if you look at the graphs on the bottom there, affirming vision and purpose, that's mostly elected official territory. Supporting that vision and purpose, that's staff territory. Then all the way down into the runway, at that point, you've got mostly staff and not very much responsibility for your elected officials, right? But notice this, every aspect of public administration, both parties have a role. Elected and staff have a role in both places. Big picture, vision, purpose, goals, those things are the most responsibility of elected officials, but they can't do that without the staff being there too. Staff have responsibility even in the big picture. And in the day-to-day stuff, this should be mostly staff. Legislators and elected officials do not have a huge role or should not have a huge role in day-to-day business. But that doesn't mean they don't have a role. They do have a role. This is about mutual respect and understanding that for everything to work properly, both parties have a place every step of the way.
And as we mentioned in the composer and the conductor and the various analogies, where we see governance is in the following types of things. So the making of the policy. So yes, the board or the legislature might rely on staff, whether it's department heads, manager, administrator, or both, to say, hey, give us some drafts on this purchasing policy update. We need to do a fund balance policy for our financial management practices. I need some examples, and we'd like to advance something at the next committee meeting. That policy making a voice, that policy making responsibility rests and vests with the legislature and the board. Strategic planning, as Ryan referenced, so to that big picture and the visioning, which we go to the next bullets, that big picture visioning that let's get together once a year and think about the next 18 months and where we want to go. What initiatives are our members of the public pressing me on? A broadband expansion, the impact of solar developments on the agricultural community in my county, recruitment and retention of the workforce. What are my residents pressing me on? Okay, that gets up to the board. That board then works with on the governance side, works with the staff, works with the manager and the administrator to say, okay, let's look at a strategic plan here. Let's look at a vision statement. Let's look at the big picture and say, where do we want to advance ourselves as a county government moving forward? And as Ryan's mentioned very eloquently a couple of different times, that these are folks, and many of you probably in this room right now, are the folks who took a leap and said, I'm going to put my name out there and I'm going to run for office. I'm going to say I would like to be a representative of my people. So Board of Supervisors, I'm running for a town supervisor. I'm going to have to wear a second hat and be a member of this Board of Supervisors. A legislature member saying, I want to be 1/12 of the legislative body of this county. I'm going to step up, an R and a D or independent or non-affiliated. I'm going to step up, get my backing, get on a ballot and run. So again, that's the representation of the will of the people. We are appointed officials. As I used to say, I used to work for a 17-member Board of Supervisors in Livingston County. I had I'm married, so I have one boss at home, 17 at work, 18 total, right? But I took my charges as an appointed official, as a county administrator, from 17 people who got elected at the local level to represent the governing body of a county jurisdiction. And that exists all over the state in different ways. But that one theme of everybody, irrespective of where they're located, is they're representing the will of the people because they got elected that way. And then it's oversight and evaluation. It's assuring that there's an audit that gets done. It's reviewing bills. It's evaluating measures that you wanted to advance. It's juxtaposing progress against what you said you wanted to do as a strategic plan. Those are the type of things that we see as sort of like hallmarks of what we define as governance. Ryan, anything on this one?
Yeah, I like this slide a lot because you need all 6 of these things for effective governance. What I have found throughout my career is elected officials want to spend a lot of their time on number 6, oversight and evaluation. It's natural, it's what's in front of you, and it's staff's job though to make sure that you are carving out time for them to do 1 through 5. Every county is a large organization. I worked for Lewis County, one of the smallest counties in the state. It still had 280 employees and a hospital and a nursing home. These are large organizations where vision and mission and values permeate down from the top through your organization. If you are not governing with mission, vision, values, strategic planning, clear big picture strategy, then that is going to permeate down through to your entire staff, right down to the front lines. So it's our job to make sure that all 6 of these are being covered and that we're not just stuck on number 6 all the time, because that tends to be the place where elected officials want to go the most often.
And also one last thing, it's also important for the staff to make sure that they support 1 through 4 as best and most as they can, because that encouragement should be there if they're not doing the planning that needs to take place, or if they're not thinking big picture, if they're not thinking vision, if they're not thinking, what do we need to do for policy? Because if that's not being done and the manager, administrator, staff are just kind of running forward without that kind of guidance and guide rails, I think you've seen issues present when that type of stuff happens. So now, speaking of issues presenting and challenges presenting, in this realm of governance and management and sort of the balance that is struck between that rhythm of those 2 separate but very much interconnected responsibility areas, where do we see tension presenting? Certainly in micromanagement. Micromanagement could be from the manager administrator down to the departments, could be the departments down to their staff, and it certainly could be from the legislature and the board down to the manager or the administrator. It could be in terms of prioritization. Again, you don't want to get ahead of your skis as an administrator manager on where you think things are going as a priority. You want to make sure that as a collective body, where this county wants to go in terms of their priorities. Certainly on personnel and HR matters, we see that presenting a decision that might have to be made by the administrator in their charge or purview that the board or legislature doesn't agree with, or I guess vice versa. Ryan, I think you've got some good commentary on the next couple.
Yeah. Equipment, in particular, that is a place where we tend to get stuck, I think, throughout my career. I have a rule, which is no, we're never putting any equipment brands on anything. Our capital plan shouldn't be, identifying the specific brand, because then you're going right down a rabbit hole of, arguing about specific brands and specific equipment capabilities. So, equipment, you got to have a 5-year capital plan, and you have to have buy-in and expectation from both sides on that capital plan. You can't be constantly bringing things to the board that are equipment related, or what, of course they're going to have opinions and jump in and get into the weeds on certain types of equipment. Same thing with personnel. you have to have you have to have your policies in place so that you're not constantly putting personnel issues in front of the governing body. The more you put equipment and personnel in front of the governing body, the more time you're going to spend on it. I guarantee it.
And where I've seen this sometimes come up is, having clarity on roles, especially on policy matters, like, for example, who's responsible for certain things. It can say in the policy, it can be the chief elected at times, and certainly in emergency responses and states of emergency, and who has to sign this or who has to put this into effect. It can be the chief elected, so the chairman of the board, a chairperson of the board. It could be the chief administrative officer. So certainly, that presents maybe some tension if the role clarity isn't easily defined or hasn't been looked at in a while. I think ego certainly goes across the board. I mean, both sides, if you will, both the governance and management, and also, public pressures. Well, so like, who's responsible for something that doesn't go well? And if it's the administrator manager was the one out in front and doing it and had the work of the board or the backing of the board to do it, that should be a collective, defense, or shall we say, or, oh, no, we all went together on this one. This is how we proceeded. And, if it didn't work out, we need to kind of have that share collective blame. If an individual went forward with a decision that wasn't the best decision, that's a different story. And again, public pressures can kind of mount and tension can present when those issues happen between, governance and management, and maybe buck passing, maybe some blame game stuff, things of that nature. So, just you want to avoid that when and where you can. Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you on this one.
Yeah, there are things that only the governing body can do, and this is very important. Only the governing body can appropriate funds. Only the governing body can do long-term planning and investing. Only the governing body can outline economic development strategy, community vision, and overall direction. Yes, there's a role for staff in this stuff, but the administrator or department head cannot say, this is our mission, this is our direction, this is our strategy. It has to be endorsed and led by the board. I think a lot of times I've seen across the state and in our counties, sometimes there's a deficit on these items. We do tend to spend too much time in the day-to-day problem solving and not enough time on some of these governance level items. This is where it's responsibility of staff. Staff have to make sure that there's time and guidance on these big picture items. It's your responsibility as staff to carve out the time to make sure that you're not ignoring this big picture, these big picture roles. And again, the Board of Legislators should be able to do a good job without having to be an expert in all 30 of our departments and all 200 of our programs. That's not the expectation of a part-time elected official. So if you are putting too much in front of your board that is not in line with the governance expectations, then that's on staff to think about what can staff take on and alleviate some time for the board to focus on these things.
Right on. Couldn't say any better myself. So how do we then, so governance, we talked about defining, we've talked about some challenges, we've talked about some best practices in terms of governance. So how do we then collectively as the county government, administrators, managers, and governing bodies, how do we maintain that governing focus? One area that we have found to be very successful in our careers, and I'll segue quickly to a slide here that Ryan's going to launch on, is new board member orientation. And this is just post-election. There's been a lot of, at least from a couple of counties I've talked to, some decent changes in terms of the makeup of some of these boards and legislatures across the state. And so what happens then when those new folks come in? They're going to get bombarded with information. They're going to have to sign on to the payroll stuff and do their paperwork. They're going to have to figure out their meetings and when they have to meet. So it's a lot at them right away. So how can we be helpful as administrator managers? How can board members be helpful with setting up a good guidance and good practices on this type of stuff, like orientation, readiness, acclimation to the job? I think a key and critical one would be new board member orientation. So Ryan's going to talk about one example that he presents at orientation in regards to the chain of command.
Yep. So again, this is something that came with me all the way from my time as a village manager, all the way up through to county government. I hand this out to elected officials at orientation when they're first joining the board. You know, every organization, every administrator, manager has to find the groove themselves. Proper chain of command is, it can't be ironclad, because you have to understand that in order for everything to work, staff and legislators, staff and supervisors are going to talk, especially in small towns. You know, a lot of these people know each other. They've known each other for a long time. It's not about controlling who's talking to each other. It's about setting boundaries. For me, the boundaries with elected officials are giving direct orders, right? So for example, you know, if you receive a complaint about a pothole on a county road, you know, the proper chain of command is call the administrator, call the highway superintendent, or call, you know, whatever committee chairman, and let them know what's going on and expect a follow-up. What we don't want you to do is start calling highway employees and instructing them to get out there and do something. That is not how our form of government is meant to work. Our form of government is meant to work where 15 to 17 to 20 people that are elected govern based on a highway master plan that has, you know, 5 years of consideration, and we don't just have every elected official calling our staff and sending them on wild goose chases every day. So this is just one example of something that we give out at board member orientation.
And likewise in Livingston County, when I was there as administrator, and we've tweaked this a little bit, we basically had a dual presentation. We had a presentation from the administrator reviewing different things going on. In particular, the focus for the administrator position is on clarity of role, nonpartisan nature, apolitical, always available to the board, works for the whole board, not just the chair, not just the chief. Also things on open meetings law, just grounding that new person in sort of some of our philosophies, grounding that new person in some of our structures, some of our policies, special projects, what we had going on, current issues. And then the clerk of the board, in our case, or the legislative clerk, or whatever it's titled at your county, was also a great piece of this. So they would kind of provide that introduction of their role, because they're that natural connection to the rest of the board, the natural connection to agendas and meetings and committee responsibilities and things of that nature. So, and as you can see, you know, one of the things that we mentioned right up front is organizations, and we mentioned NISAC, and this isn't a plug for NISAC, they're not asking me to do it, but we mentioned NISAC in particular to emphasize the camaraderie, the information exchange, the networking, and the benefits of joining and participating in this association. As a new board member, they can get a ton out of it. And so we encourage that literally on day one when we meet with them. Ryan, is this you or me?
I've got a few notes.
Okay.
Goals and planning. So one of the ways that you can be really clear about governance and administration is setting yourself up for success through goals and planning. So this is about intentionally carving out time for the big stuff. It's about building trust, building buy-in, and applying structure. So when you can set up your goals for the year, or maybe, you know, goals for the next 3 years, or goals for the legislative term, and then you can go out and attack those, that builds momentum and it allows you to get some things done. But you have to have legislator and elected official buy-in and ownership. So, you know, if the board adopts these goals and the board says, this is what we want to focus on, that should be enough permission for staff to get moving and get going on it.
And goal setting and, you know, planning on an annual or semi-annual basis or for a multi-year plan does not need to be a massive investment of time. It doesn't need to be, you know, charrettes and a ton of public meetings and staff surveys over multiple weeks and 40 different meetings. And it certainly can be. And if that jurisdiction county wants it done that way, that's the way you do it and that's the way you carry it out. But I think sometimes people think it can be so daunting and an exercise that's going to take forever and it's going to be bureaucracy and more just, you know, time suck. It doesn't have to be. It could be a simple meeting or two in a workshop retreat type setting where you all get together after the first of the year and you say, okay, we're the newly seated board or the newly seated legislature. Let's go plan ahead a series of goals and initiatives that we would like to accomplish in a few key and critical areas or themes. And then let's work with the staff and the management to kind of really define and hone in on what those are going to be. Let's report them to the public, and let's drill down on them throughout the course of the year, and then let's report on them at the end of the year to see how we did. It can be just as simple as something like that.
So what we do in Jefferson County is, when we're going through it right now, so it's perfect timing. Right now, end of the year, we send out a survey to department heads. So it starts with department heads. What are the initiatives that you need support on next year? What are the big things that your department is focusing on next year? We take the results of the department head input, we boil it into a draft. I then bring the draft to the committee chairs. They look over the draft. Maybe they have some things they want to add or subtract. Then we bring that draft, and you can see it. It's right here on the left, legislative priorities for 2025. We bring that draft then through the committee structure. The committees, again, have a chance for input, add a goal, subtract a goal, tweak a goal, and then we adopt it. And adopting it is critical because you have to have ownership and buy-in from both sides. So this has been adopted. The Board of Legislators voted and said, this is what we're going to focus on next year. And it's, it's some complicated items and it's some fairly easy ones. We just cut the ribbon on our new airport last week. That was something that the board set out to do at the beginning of the year, and they've completed it. Then you've got something like support homeless initiatives. It's vague because we didn't know exactly where we were going to go with that at the beginning of last year. But it's a goal, it's a legislative priority, which means it gives permission for staff to get moving on it and bring some initiatives back to the legislators for input and adoption. This is old, the thing on the right here, but we track each of the goals. We assign a department to each of them, and I'll be presenting back to the legislative leadership this afternoon that we're at about 88% at this point in the year. So this is just an example of one way that it can be done, that it really sets you up for success to make sure the board is focused on governance and the staff can focus on execution.
And one thing to bring up on here, Ryan, that you didn't directly touch on is under Finance and Rules Committee, number 9, develop New York State legislative agenda. That was one of the, I had a lot of fun doing that with our board over the years. And I think that's an amazing, awesome, distinct, individual, whatever you want to call it, opportunity for the board to really flex that governance muscle, because that's stuff that, first of all, they'll be advocating and messaging fellow elected officials. It's a legislative agenda to the feds or to the state saying Jefferson County, in your case, needs help on the following things, or needs support on this, or needs you to push back on this bill that's being advanced that we as a legislature don't like. And a planning process is an awesome opportunity to really get and extract out of the elected officials their key priorities as it relates to other legislative endeavors at the state or federal level.
So what we do
is
yep, just to continue on, not to belabor the point, but once we have that list of strategic priorities, we can then start to build out your year. Again, to Ian's point of no surprises, I was able to build this back in January, and I know that on October 14th, we presented the 6-year capital plan and fleet plan. On November 5th, we did the DSS quarterly update, and then on November 5th, we did the budget workshop. So, we only have, 40 or so meetings a year to schedule. It shouldn't be that hard if you have a list of priorities to fit them through, identify where you're going to try to be in each quarter, and build out what your agenda for the year looks like. And of course, these things move around, nothing's set in stone, but it gives you an opportunity to get buy-in and build an agenda that everybody can understand.
Also, it gets you out of sight, out of mind, right? So if something's not top of mind and it's not topical and it's not being talked about and it's not a public facing agenda where the public could be there, so you're really setting yourself up, you have to talk about this. If you're not doing that, it tends to kind of just gain some dust somewhere on the proverbial shelf, whether that's literal or figurative. And unless you really are purposeful, this is one of the best slides in the presentation, in my opinion. And if Ryan would have been kind enough to share this with me many years ago, which he did not, I would have certainly looked to advance something like this in Livingston County with this type of a structure, because while we did strategic planning and goal setting and things of that nature, the improvements and enhancements in the type of structure stuff here would have been very beneficial. And I would encourage everybody to think about this in that type of a context. So I think that, again, it's structure, and I perfect segue. I just said that, structure to establish boundaries. It's the structure of the committee. So it's the work of the committee. What's the committee doing? What's the charge of the committee? What does their sort of plan look like on an annual basis? It's the agenda management, what goes on the agenda, what doesn't go on the agenda. It's resolution management, which in Ryan's case, he's got a great anecdote, which when I finish the last bullet, I'll have him point to. It's also capital planning, it's the purchasing policy. So there are many structural elements you can use to your advantage that is going to better or more refine your situation as it relates to governance and administration, and in turn enhance and improve your overall county operations. But Ryan, I love your example of your proliferation of resolutions and sort of how you look to make that a tad more efficient.
Yeah, when I first started in Lewis County, the county was doing almost 600 resolutions a year. And after my first year or so, I said, boy, it's just so much, red tape, and it's just hard to manage all that. And I did a survey around the county, around the state, and realized that we were having the board vote on so much more than we really needed them to vote on. And we got it down to around 250 resolutions. And in Jefferson County this year will be around 300, to 325 resolutions. So you have to think about that. Think about what is taking up your elected officials' time. Did they run for office to vote on amending the fire extinguisher contract for adding additional year? Is that why they ran for office? Or did they run for office to focus on things that'll really help the community? And the way you manage that is through policy. Set policy that gives staff the authority to do some of this stuff, so it takes it off the plate of your elected officials.
Great point. Thank you, Ryan. So additional tactics and strategies. We're not going to go through all these, but I think there's some do's and don'ts, and there's some things that we would recommend that you have, that you enforce to the extent that you can. And one area in particular that we've heard some challenges on of late is across the country, not necessarily in New York and not necessarily in New York counties. There is a growing level of incivility, sort of lack of decorum at some of these functions like board meetings, and there's spats that are public, and there's people just, again, really poor form, whether that's a member of the public, whether that's a member of staff, whether that's a member of the governing body. So any and all times that we can look to neutralize or mitigate incivility, I think we want to do that. We want to sort of enforce rules of order and policies around that. But a couple things that I would like to highlight here are engage the community. I think the more you can do community engagement, the better. Transparency, the old concept of sunlight being the best disinfectant. You can really position yourselves as a leader in community engagement by simply just meeting with your constituents on a regular basis, kind of gaining their inputs, and then bringing that back in a proactive and productive fashion back to your whole group, so the whole legislature, the whole board. But I also like on the don'ts. I think the top one, Ryan, I'd like you to comment on. I think that's a good point that you've made in this presentation before about bad votes.
Yeah, if there's just a classic example, I won't name the city, but up in my neck of the woods, the city's in a protracted labor dispute with the fire department, and the staff goes out and gets a grant to add 10 firefighters for 3 years. That is a bad vote. You're putting your board in a bad spot. You've got to be aware of those types of things. Don't ask your board to weigh in on something that is a loser. Sort it out ahead of time and protect them.
And in the interest of time, we'll kind of we want to allow some time for questions and answers too. So we got a couple more slides to go through, and then we'll have hopefully a soft landing with at least 15 minutes or so for questions for those that are still on. So thank you for your patience on that. It's also good to take take the temperature of your board. So are you spending not enough time, too much time, or just the right time on a particular matter? So you do a survey at the end of the year or the beginning of the year, and then really just see where you're at. And that could be informal or it could be formal. It could be talking to the leadership who they talk to the rest of the board. It could be surveying the entirety of the board, really kind of testing things out. Hey, how are we doing on this? And this is one of our initiatives. Are we spending enough time on it? Are we still in tune with what you'd like to see moving forward on your stuff that you wanted to highlight this year in your term? You know, things of that nature. It's always good to do that.
KYP, this is Coach Calipari, one of my favorites. Coach Calipari has on big letters in his office, KYP, know your personnel. And I think this really gets to the crux of the whole thing. These are complex issues. There is no perfect borderline that should describe each relationship with each elected official, or the perfect line between governance and management. It's always a gray area. And the best way to sort through these issues and gray areas is by knowing your people, knowing your legislators, your elected officials, your supervisors, know what they care about and anticipate their needs. Same with your staff, know what they care about. You can head off a lot of issues by having good relationships and understanding what matters to the people you work with.
Yeah, just a quick aside on this one. I had a board member for a long time who was most interested in wildlife, fish issues, recreation concerns, trails, parks, things of that nature. So that was just one example. I had another person who was really interested in emergency management and emergency medical services. Another one was very interested in codes and zoning and localities and those type of issues. Just as a staff member, as the leader there, as the administrator manager, you need to know what makes them tick. You need to know what is a controversial item for them that might not be a controversial item for somebody else. And that's, I think, what Ryan's talking about in some ways about, really knowing your personnel.
And make them feel part of the team. Share the
Yes.
wins and losses. That's the important thing. That's part of how this whole thing works.
So LP Cookingham is a stalwart of the profession of local government management. He was a Kansas City manager way back in the day. These guideposts, which we're not going to go over in depth, are all about probably 60 some years old, 70 years old. I still think they have massive and direct relevancy to the work that we're doing in 2025 and 2026. So these were guideposts to the management professional that was working for a governing body. And I shortened them up a little bit and kind of, made them current to the day. But they are very much on point. And I think if you took this slide as a staff member of a county and said, I'm going to kind of put this front and center on my desk or hang it up on a wall, and you kept going back to it in times of, challenge or times of strife, I think you would be in a good spot moving forward. So just a couple of things that I think we want to highlight here. Ignoring cranks. You're going to have people, the STP, the same 10 people. You're going to have the KW, the keyboard warriors. You're going to have the NIMBYs. You're going to have the cave people, Citizens Against Virtually Everything. You're going to have all those types of the gadflies and people that are, and sometimes ignorance is bliss. Doesn't mean you don't have to be responsive or respectful to those people. Of course you do, and you have to address their concerns, etc. But you have to really, ignore some things to advance some things, and that's, I think, what LP was highlighting there. I also like the term, and we like the term pace. Each board and ledge has a pace and has a rhythm. It has a style and kind of a schedule, and they're going to operate at their pace. You don't want to be too fast on something where you missed the mark because you were trying to be so quick out of the gate on some policy matter or whatever. You also don't want to be on the flip side too slow, extra bureaucratic, unnecessarily redundant, too much red tape, right? So you want to really kind of exercise that pace of government. Anything else you want to highlight on this one, Ryan?
Peer networking, reach out, I mean, pick up the phone, call your peers, when you go to the NISAC events, make relationships. We're all dealing with the same stuff. So, pick up the phone and you'll never be let down by your peers in local government.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. NISAC administrators get together there's an administrators group, there's a chief electeds subgroup, there are committees you can participate in. So definitely participating in those is very important. Another set of kind of reminders or whatever here, these are some good takeaways. I like a couple things on this to highlight. One is number 3. Well, let me start with number 2, communication and messaging. I think it's important to communicate what you've got going on to your public. I use a story of a major Fortune 500 company was coming to my county. We were one of 2 finalists for this. It ended up going to a different county. We lost out on it, but we're driving around with the Fortune 500 CEO in a bus showing him various industrial sites where this massive project was going to go. And he looked at me and he said, "Hey, you got a lot of crime in this county." And I said, "No, we don't. Actually, why would you say that?" And he says, "Well, I pick up your paper, all I pretty much read's the blotter." It's because our sheriff did a press release on every felony, with mugshots and commentary on the arrest, which is his purview and his right to do, and people, I guess, appreciated that he did that. But it wasn't contrasted or wasn't almost diluted by the positive messaging that the county should have been doing at the time to highlight all of our great programs and services and, the great work that we were doing and other things happening. So I think it's a good opportunity, and it really will allow you to show the successes of what your governance management structure looks like in terms of what results you're producing when you focus on communication and messaging. And another one I want to highlight on this list is number 3, which is remember not everyone blank. And remember not everyone knows exactly what you know about local government. Remember, not everyone is interested in this issue like you are. Remember, not everyone came from the same, school of reference that you came from as to why you're positioning your viewpoint on something, right? So it's being respectful, it's being empathetic, it's being compassionate, and I think that would really lend itself well to good governance management relationships. Ryan, anything to highlight on this one?
My favorite is be politically savvy, not political. There's a lot of times staff, I think, just throw their hands up and say, "Oh, that's not my area. That, the board, that's the board." Remember that first slide with the flight analogy. There is responsibilities in both areas. Staff have to understand how the board operates. You have to understand board dynamics, or else you're never going to get anything done. But that doesn't mean you're out campaigning. It doesn't mean you're, overtly political, but you have to have some savvy.
And so finishing up, some other best practices to avoid, other best practices to avoid. And again, these are sort of built as takeaways as well. So in the interest of time, we won't dwell on each one of them individually, but best practices you can kind of take away and share: communication, protocols. Again, we talked about role clarity, knowing what the local laws and have to say, knowing what the policy has to say. In particular, I really like, as an administrator manager, thick skin and Excel. So thick skin in terms of take the arrows. If someone's going after a department, administrators got to take the arrows. If the board is sitting there and they took a position on something that's generating a boatload of controversy, sometimes you need to stick your neck out and then be the point person, be the PIO, either deflect the criticism, or if praise is coming your way, share that praise. And I think that the other thing would be excel. Like, we're in this world of public service, the county government level. People are paying us, or sometimes it feels like it's volunteer if you're a board member maybe, but really display that value of professional management if you're an administrator manager. Exemplify the service aspects of public service, and at the end of the day, get stuff done. Show the value to the taxpayer, show the bang for the buck. I know in Livingston County, where I was, we just they just did a budget. The average single family home is valued at X, the tax rate is this, leads to an average just county tax bill of $1,452. $719 1,000 times 200 some thousand dollars in value. They have to be able to show the value to the taxpayer of what they get for $1,452. And if they can't do that, they're not doing a good job in multiple ways. So again, finishing up here, make time for your board and staff. We talked about clarity. I guess the one thing I'd like to reference here is number 5. I think what Ryan wants to talk about number 7, and then we'll kind of close out, I think. Number 5 for me is the mini milestones, the snowball effect. If you aim for like 1% improvements and not hit a home run every time, aim for those base hits in your projects, in your initiatives, but also in your structure stuff. So we just dumped a bunch of stuff on you. Maybe it's overwhelming if you haven't done many or most of this stuff. You're not going to do it overnight. You're not going to change it overnight. Aim for one mini milestone. Say, try to advance a small mini retreat, strategic planning kind of exercise with your board or legislature. Aim for that one mini milestone to get one thing done. Say we're going to do 2 more press releases a quarter, and then do 2 more press releases a month, then do 2 more press releases a week on different things going on in the county. That snowball effect, each individual instance of activity, like I just mentioned, will not improve or move the needle considerably, but all of them taken together in totality certainly will. And that's kind of what I call the snowball effect. And I know, Ryan, on a timely basis, because we just had the election, I think you like to make a point on number 7 as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, staff need to be aware of what your elected officials are out doing, especially during the election cycle. If you a really savvy operator can, maybe hold the tough budget year off the election cycle. Recognize when your board members are out getting petitions, and maybe you don't have the big press release, or try to understand that you can't ignore it. It's really not fair to your elected officials.
Thanks, Ryan. In the interest of time, I think we'll pass through the things to avoid, and we'll move right to the open forum. What did we miss? What say you? Jeanette, I know there was an opportunity, I think, for some Q&A. We have booked till about 11:15, so we do have some time, and we wanted to see what might be on your mind, what we missed, clarifying questions, comments, etc.
Thank you, Ian and Ryan. What an incredible presentation. We currently do not have any questions, and what that always indicates for a person like me who works for NISAC, who runs all these webinars, is that's always an indication of just how thorough the presentation has been. And this in no way surprises me. I would like to say that in lieu of the fact that we have a little bit of time and that we're without direct questions right now, there was actually one that just came in that I wanted to share literally as I was speaking. People are asking, is this recording and slides, if they're going to be available afterwards? And the answer is yes, they are. There will be a recording and a PDF of the slides used on the NISAC website. So just go to NISAC, www.nisac.org, click on webinars, or you can go to www.nisac.org/webinars and just look for today's date. These will be posted within an hour after the conclusion of this webinar, after they've been converted for posting. So they will be available. I'll also be sending a link to these documents in the follow-up email that you'll receive tomorrow as a thanks for attending the program. And I also want to tell you that another comment that came in was just great presentation. Thank you. I think it would be great if you're willing to go back to that last slide that, to make room for time. But I just think that those were some interesting issues. I thought maybe if you want to just touch upon them, since we have a few moments, that would be awesome.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the things to avoid, which I guess we avoided because we passed right by it. The things to avoid in proper, effective, efficient board governance relations and sort of how you carry it out. Being too big for some task. I think that's for maybe the administrator. You don't want to play the administrator card and be like, well, I'm the top appointed official. I'm too big for that, or I can't do that. Nobody is. Everybody's rowing the same direction. Everybody's got a role to play, and anybody has to be tasked or asked to do something with the board. You go ahead and do it. I have found at times individuals run aground with relationship management when they decide to, curry favor or play favorites with just select members of their board. Like, I'm going to be real connected and tied to the, I'm going to be real connected and tied to the chairperson of the board. Well, they get unelected in an election cycle. Now what's going to happen? As opposed to being very purposeful about working with the whole board. So unless you're a direct appointee of a single person, unless your structure works like that, which I'm not really aware of one that does, you work for the whole board as an administrator manager. And sometimes that's difficult if there's some difference of opinion on that board. But you got to go with majority rule and what the actions of the board are. But sometimes people get really closely connected to a leader on the board, and that's usually, it's okay to be a little bit more connected to them. But if you feel like you're kind of just doing ends arounds because you're working directly with one and you're not really sharing fully with the others, I think that's a problem. I'll take a pause there. I've got some other commentaries, but Ryan, anything jump out at you on this one?
Yeah, neglecting performance appraisals, it's a tough one because they're painful, they take a lot of time, but they're so important, both up and down the chain, right? So, it's important that the board have an opportunity to evaluate their appointees, not everyone in the organization. It's up to the administrator and management to make sure that there are performance appraisals, or at the very least, some level of check-in on a regular basis with department heads and management employees. These are great opportunities for communication, and they can be painful at first, but in the long run, it will save you a lot of headache and open up a lot of channels of communication.
Speaking of that, I think it's also a good segue into back to number 3, which is making assumptions. And in fact, lessons learned, Monday morning quarterback, and you can self-reflect and self-appraise your own doings, right? And I look back on my career in county administration. Sometimes I would make an assumption that the board was aligned or lined up with my thinking on something. So I was kind of trying to take my cues and feel them out, and I thought they were wanting to move forward on something, and I was wrong. So if you make an assumption on something, it's good to fact check it. It's good to test it. It's good to check in on that. And I think if you go back to some of our slides with this, the rhythm and the cadence of meetings and strategic plan and check-ins and reports and things like that, that almost is a preventative mechanism for making erroneous assumptions, because you won't really have the opportunity to make erroneous assumptions if you're having those regular check-ins, committee touch points, updates, board surveys, testing the waters, making sure we're still doing the right thing. Are we still going in the right direction? And you won't have to make any assumptions because you'll be doing it on a regular basis. Also, I mean, we've mentioned this a couple of times, and again, it just so happens it's an ISAC and why we're talking, but we always promote board legislature training. We always put in budget funds for them to go to training. At the municipal level, when I was at the village government, the equivalent would be NICOM. We always made a point to say, you should budget funds for your board members to get training and to get upskilled and to develop professionally, develop personally, become a better board member, learn more from other people, have that information exchange. So if you're not promoting that, I think that's a big mistake. What else? Anything we miss on this one?
Well, just for those of us that are the folks that are still with us, back to the idea of structure. Something that I wanted to mention that we skipped over is your committee structure is critical. What type of committees do you have? What I find often, a lot of communities have basically your committee structure sets you up to have a mini board of directors for each department. So if you have a highway committee, a public health committee, a DSS committee, and a public safety committee, you basically, those legislators or those supervisors, their expectation is they get to be a mini board of directors for each of those departments. And that's not really what governance is set up to do. So if you look at your committee structure and think, how can we set ourselves up for more success, more time to focus on the big stuff? That is a good place to start, because you can have all the best intentions in the world, but if at the end of the day, you're diving right back into the shallow end of the pool on very tiny day-to-day items with these really small targeted committees, that's where you're going to spend your time.
Great point.
I want to thank Ian and Ryan for this incredibly insightful presentation. This is not only a great webinar for today, but I can tell you that from a training perspective for NISAC, this is a resource that I'm glad I have in my arsenal of recorded webinars. Just an extraordinarily powerful piece of guidance on the core elements of public service. I want to thank Ian and Ryan for their time today, for also providing this at the fall seminar. This is invaluable for not only us, but even, we've just charted how many newly elected officials there are, and many of these elected officials come from counties that have administrators. Right now, we know that we have well over 200 newly electeds, and there were big shifts. So there are a lot of people who are going to be seeking out training, and I am so appreciative to have this recording to add to some of their newly elected training, because it will absolutely be invaluable for them to understand the structure and the nature of how their county runs. So thank you, Ian and Ryan, and I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. We hope that you have found this webinar insightful and educational. And I'm going to close the session today by just saying to everybody, that we hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving next week, and we'll see you at our next training. Thank you, Ian and Ryan.